Welcome, everyone, to the XPAND Podcast. I am your host, Zarin Beatty, and I'm with our guest, Dr. Tim Floyd. Dr. Floyd, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful.
Good.
Thank you.
Good.
This is a very special episode. I think not only for me, but for our whole audience. I've heard nothing but incredible things about you, and every time I say that to you, you respond in a very humble manner. And I I don't know, man, like this is gonna be a really excellent episode to kind of learn more about why you chose to do what you've done with your life. And from my end, I could ask you all kinds of details on you being an award-winning author or, a photographer, an author, a surgeon, working with Buzz Aldrin, kind of all of these amazing things that you've done and been through. But what really fascinates me is why you went through those things and what you learned going through those moments. Because they're moments that not many people are going to get the opportunity to experience. Therefore, you have wisdom that you've gathered from those scenarios that not a lot of people may have been able to learn. But thank you for being here.
Yeah.
First off.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. How long have you been a surgeon, and kind of what got you into that career?
I finished medical school in '82. And when you're in medical school, your last year or two, you have to kind of choose what field you want to go into. And so I chose surgery. And so started that training in '82, did 2 years of general surgery. Then I worked in an emergency room for a year, and did some research. And then I finished out 4 more years of orthopedic training, so that was more specialized. And then I had what they call fellowship. So after you've completed your training in surgery, you can go and practice that particular field. But if you want to subspecialize, then you do a little further training that they call fellowships. And I wound up doing 2 of those. One right away, kind of 2 years after I finished my training. And then I practiced for another 6 or 7 years, and then I decided to go back and do a second fellowship.
What were your fellowships in?
The first one was in spine surgery, so you get that training as a resident, but this was a little bit deeper training and, a full year of just doing nothing but spine. And then the second one was at a center where they did really complicated, highly complex spine surgery. So that's where the second one was.
And so would the correct term be like an orthopedic spine surgeon? Is
Right.
that what you are?
Yeah, exactly.
Or what you've been doing?
Exactly.
What's it, first of all, like you're talking to somebody who can comprehend the body, but I've never been inside of someone else's body.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like working on somebody to that degree? Like, what are you thinking? What are you going through? How much of that is instinct and intuition and trust, and how much of that is a lot of actual knowledge?
I think it's both of those. The reason it takes so long is because it takes that long to learn, the anatomy. So you basically memorize a really complicated map, so that you can go anywhere in that map and with confidence and know that, okay, I'm over here, but I need to get over there. So this is how I get there without having to go get a GPS or, a textbook or something like that. So that's, largely why the training takes so long. And then, over the years, decades that you practice it, it just becomes more and more familiar. So that sometimes when people who have no experience in the operating room at all somehow wind up in the operating room, maybe they just took a job as, whatever, and it's their first day in the operating room, they're kind of surprised at how relaxed the atmosphere is. They're tense because it's an operating room and, oh my God, it's a human body and everything. But, everybody in there, that's just what they do. I've I've never been a pilot, but people go, God, how can you do that? And I go, well, how can somebody land a jet on an aircraft carrier in a pitching sea in the middle of the night when the lights are off? It's just, there's a way to do it. And you train and you get better and you get better and better. I can't imagine doing that at all. I mean, if I found myself in a jet and they said, okay, you got to go find the aircraft carrier and land, I go, oh my God. But especially if I had passengers, but I don't know. It's kind of like that, it's just how life goes. You just get more and more and more familiar.
That's an incredible way to articulate that. Describing it as a map that really does paint a beautiful picture. And it shows how familiar you really are being in that line of work. And I mean, there's a reason, why there's only a few amount of people who are in that line of work and who are very successful at doing what they're doing. And just, I don't know, it's not mechanical, but it's really cool how human beings can move in a way where they can maneuver through very sensitive parts of the body and still like reach success because of things that you can recall in your memory bank and things that you've studied and learned and progressed through. And it's a really incredible aspect. Just, I mean, I feel like of your character in general. And from my knowledge, did you quit your practice and then enlist in the military?
Yeah. 9/11 happened and I got mad and went down and joined the Army. I mean, that was just my reaction to it. I think everybody had a different reaction. I was 47 at the time. And my first instinct was to go to New York. I thought they're going to need, I don't care how many people they've got there, providers, healthcare providers, they're going to need a lot. And then it became clear pretty quickly that the devastation was so complete that really nobody was wounded. And so I wanted to do something just like everybody else wanted to do something. And I could have done it. We all responded in our own way, but that was my way because I knew that the Army needed orthopedic surgeons. Everybody, well, not everybody, but someone from every generation of my family going back to the Revolutionary War had served. And so I had that kind of in the back of my mind. And so, yeah, that's what I chose to do. I went down and signed up and thinking, I would be sent to Afghanistan at some point. But it took a couple of years to get trained and all that sort of business. So then Iraq came along and they sent us into Iraq.
How long were you in Iraq?
I don't know the exact amount of time. I was in clinic. It was in, I think, early February. And for like February 8th or something, and I got a phone call that we were being activated. Nobody had announced that we're definitely going into Iraq or anything like that, but, we got activated. I was in a reserve unit, and so that meant something. So we had to spend the first 6 weeks kind of getting ready for that. And then we went over there in late March and staged in Kuwait. We were in Kuwait for maybe 2 days. And it's kind of a blur. So it was late March. I can't give you the exact date that we, quote, crossed the berm. There's like a berm between Iraq and Kuwait. And so they call it crossing the berm. And so it was right at the beginning. We were at the so-called, tip of the spear. We went in with the 4th Infantry Division and just moved north, kind of leaped north, held up south of Baghdad until that was secured. It really wasn't secured at that point, but until it was, taken, until they, declared that was, then that was about the time that hostilities were declared, over, which wasn't the case. And then we hopscotched through Baghdad, north of that, to a town called Balad. We were there for a while, and then we wound up in a town called Tikrit. And then I came home in June. So however many months that is.
What was it like performing your practice under those circumstances compared to back home?
Well, completely different. You can imagine. First of all, we were in a tent. We didn't have an operating room. Secondly, it was back to the basics. There was no complicated surgery that we could do because it was a very dirty environment. And so basically, we were just doing limb saving and life saving
Mm,
procedures. So I was in what's called a forward surgical team, and that's 20 people, 2 tents, 20 people, 6 Humvees, 4 surgeons, 3 general surgeons, and 1 orthopedic surgeon. And the support personnel were nurses and 2 anesthetists and a couple of other people, administrative type people. And it's highly mobile. People think of a MASH hospital as it's called a Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. That's what MASH stands for.
that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's 200. That's over 100 people in a MASH, and they have what we call hard walled operating rooms. So they have these trucks that you can pop the walls up, and it's an air conditioned, filtered uh, environment that's similar to what we've got back here. So uh, they're not really that mobile though, because there's a lot of personnel and a lot of stuff. So forward surgical team, we have to be able to be gone in an hour. In other words, if we get an order, we need to move. We need to be able to take down all of our equipment, pack it on our Humvees, and be gone within 60 minutes. And we used to, in our part of our training, we had drills where we would do that. We'd set everything up, and we'd be set up for a while. And typically at like 2 a.m, somebody would come in and say, "Okay, got to move." And so we would take everything down and see if we could be ready within an hour to go. And we'd have competitions with each other. We had 2 operating room tables. And so the 2 surgeons would team up, and we would race each other to either assemble the thing or disassemble the thing and get it packed up and that sort of thing. So it was highly mobile. The mission of a forward surgical team is to be within just a few kilometers of where whatever action is taking. So it's a way that the Army was able to insert surgical assets as far forward as they possibly could, whereas a MASH, due to its inertia, has to be back pretty far. And the Army doesn't have any more MASHs. There was 1 MASH in hospital or in country, in Iraq, but we gave it to Pakistan a couple of years later. So I think they realized they don't need the MASHs anymore. So that a person is injured or whatever, then their buddy takes care of them, patches them up or whatever, calls in transport, helicopter, ground ambulance, and they're brought to the nearest forward surgical team where they're stabilized and everything, and then we get them directly. At that time, out of country. We didn't have any other medical assets in the country, so we would get them out of country by helicopter or something like that.
How did that test your expertise? How radical of a shift was that to kind of go back to the basics?
Uh, Pretty easy because it was really wound care and amputation surgery.
Mm,
So now the general surgeons, most of the work we did was orthopedic because we treated what were called coalition forces, allied, if you want to think of it, our forces versus, and we treated a lot of, enemy, if you want to use that word, forces, mostly enemy forces. And in the case of our forces, they were usually injured in the extremities because they had body armor. And so we didn't see a whole lot of trunk injuries. In the case of everybody else, if they had a trunk or a head injury, they didn't survive. So when we saw them, they mostly had extremity injuries. And so there was a lot of extremity wound treatment and, like I said, amputations going on. So it was at a pretty crude level. So that's it wasn't difficult, technically.
technically. Yeah, to the average person, that may be rather difficult.
Well, no, I guess what I meant by that is it was like a civil war. It was like the American Civil War because at one point we had so many injuries we had run out of morphine.
Oh, wow.
And we were doing, mostly dressing changes, but other what we call debridements, where you're kind of cleaning up the wound, without anesthesia, without morphine. And it was a very dirty environment. And so there were a lot of infections just by virtue of the fact that of where we were. And so, you hear these stories about, gangrene and people screaming in the Civil War. And
Hmm.
that's kind of, what we had at a certain point.
That's powerful. Thank you for your service, by the way.
No, it was an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, your energy when you talk about it, it's very strong and confident.
It was a powerful experience. It really was. It was an honor to be able to serve.
That's something special. And it sounds like you served with actual honor, and it's really cool to just hear you talk about. To transition from here, thank you for sharing all of that, by the way. So I don't know the exact details as to why I'm asking, but you mentioned that you worked with Buzz Aldrin on working on a bone serum with hibernating bears.
Yeah, he called me. It was weird. That's a surreal experience for, pick up the phone. Like, who? I was, I had this idea that bears will hold the secret to being for osteoporosis, treatment of osteoporosis, because during the winter, they go into a den and they lay down and they don't move very much. Now, they're not hibernating like a ground squirrel hibernates or whatever, because they go into this really, really, really deep sleep where everything slows down. Whereas bears, they're too big to do that. They can't make those metabolic shifts like that. A squirrel will go in and breathe once a minute and have 2 heartbeats a minute or whatever. And then it'll wake up every 10 days or so and go out and eat some snow and maybe eat some grass from a stash it had or something, and it'll urinate and defecate and then go back to sleep. Bears can't do that. Their heart rate is kind of about 80% of what it normally is. They're breathing normally and everything like that, but they just there's no food. They just lay there. And they get up and they sometimes go outside the den, but they've developed a completely different mechanism that we still don't understand. So during that 6-month period of time, they don't urinate, they don't defecate, they don't eat. They live off their fat, and they're able to. They make urine with the kidney, but the kidney also resorbs it all, and the waste products that are able to do something they can't even do in the summertime, and no other animal can do. They take those waste products and they convert them into protein, and so there's this period of time during the winter when bears completely change their metabolism to survive. And, if you or I were to go lay down, our bones would get weak. If we were to go lay down for 6 months, they've done these experiments with NASA. They've taken people and put them at bed rest for months at a time to see what happens to them. And they start losing bone mass. And that calcium has to leave the body somehow, because if it builds up, it becomes toxic. It'll kill you very quickly. And so you have to get rid of it. And the only way to get rid of it is through the urine. So I was thinking, okay, here's an animal that's laying down for 6 months. It's got to be chewing up its bone, but it can't urinate to get rid of the calcium. So how does it survive? And I found out that it takes the calcium and it recycles it back into bone production, and it actually makes bone. So that and it makes bone at a rate somewhere between 3 and 5 times faster when it's laying down in the winter than it does in the summertime when it's up. So, this completely counterintuitive biology going on. So there must be some molecule that's triggering all of this. So that's what I was looking into. And I'd published a couple of articles on it. And I'm not sure how he found out about it. He, obviously had friends at NASA, and I was kind of working with the people at NASA. So it may have been that way. But yeah, so he called me, and we never really worked on anything together. He was just very interested in it. Was trying to help me get it figured out. But it was interesting getting to know him. I haven't seen him in a long time, but it was interesting getting to know him. It was a really weird, surreal experience. He invited me over to his house, and I'm sitting on his couch, and he's sitting next to me and he starts telling me about walking around on the moon. And my first reaction was, this guy is crazy. This guy thinks he walked around on the moon, and then I went, no, he did. He walked around on the moon. It was weird. It's like, at first I thought, oh man, I'm sitting next to a nutcase. But then I went, no, this is Buzz Aldrin. He did it. He walked on the moon.
That's incredible.
It was kind of crazy.
That's just to go back to that small amount of people who, are experienced in one aspect of being a human being. It's truly incredible, whether it's walking on the moon or being a surgeon or even being in the military. It's like, I don't know, being a person, it's so remarkable to meet people like yourself and to meet every other person that's been in this room with me and kind of learn from them as people. Like, you just expressed deep intellect that has been acquired over your whole lifetime. And to be able to articulate that and express that in the way that you do, I'm blown away right now, to be completely honest.
Well, I just think you have to be open, and you're a very open person, but I just think you have to be open, and I think you have to be willing to go with opportunities that present themselves. And you may not even see that it's an opportunity, but I just think in life, there's been so many times when I've been standing on the dock and there's a boat right there, and I step onto the boat and I realize it's not moored, it's not tied, and the boat starts to leave the dock, and I got to make a decision. Am I going to stay on the dock, or am I going to leap onto the boat? And I've never regretted leaping onto the boat. It's been a complete change in the direction of my life, but leaping onto the boat brings me into a whole new experience and direction that, and it's not like you leave that behind. It's not like when I joined the Army and jumped on that boat. I didn't leave my life of being an orthopedic surgeon behind. It was just another deeper experience, I guess, if you want to look at it that way in terms of orthopedics, that I had because of that. So I think that's important. I think that when opportunities present themselves, to, not be afraid to take, and you're a great example of that, what you've done with your life here in the past few years. It's just, you got to take those opportunities.
May I ask how old you are?
Yes, I'm 64. Just turned 64, yeah.
And you were 47 when you went into the military or enlisted.
Right.
It's incredible to me, even in that amount of time period in your life, the drastic change that you've gone through between 47 and 64. So I'm 27 next month, and I'm finally to like the point in my life where I can look back on my life and kind of like understand what I went through. When we're like 15, we only remember a certain portion of our life,
Mm-hmm.
but I can gather, 20 years of experience now.
Mm-hmm.
And that determines how I behave now, and that helps me understand how mindful I was or how I treated certain people. And so, 20 years from now, I still doing this path or doing what we're doing, I wonder who I'll be, how I'll be, and the behavior that I'll uphold. And so to see people like you, who have 40 years on me, comprehend that same aspect of taking that step, moving forward, and being able to engage in a discussion with you, it's truly inspiring. I think it's inspiring for me, for the people around you, like my father, who's 55. He has nothing but, he thinks you're one of the best people he knows.
Yeah, feelings mutual.
And he's an incredible person too.
Mm-hmm.
And to grow around these people like yourself, we've only, had a couple engagements, but to be the child of my father and to learn from people like Aubrey Marcus or all these other people in my age group, our environment matters so much into who we are and who we will be.
Yes.
And it's extremely helpful for me, being a young man, talking with you about this in your 60s where you're sharing knowledge that I, in theory, won't be able to learn yet. Maybe in some degree, but you add that 40 years of experience and it's just a completely different world. And I can even see that now from like 5 years of experience from the people around me. People who are 19, 20. It's amazing, and it's in no judgmental aspect, but you can just see like younger people have a lot to learn, and I know I do. And so it's really cool to hear about your journey and to kind of gather a comprehension on where you are right now.
And I feel like I still have a lot to learn. And the thing is, um, my dad always used to tell me that he felt like he was 20, even when he was like 70 or whatever, and his body was starting to fail him. He always told me, I feel like I'm 20, and I mean, I feel like I'm 20. I feel inside, I feel kind of insecure still. I feel like, oh, I'm just this, kid, and I don't really know what's, what's going on out there. So, I, some people are probably able to feel differently, but I still feel like it's kind of like, the moment. It's like there really is no past. I mean, you have a past, obviously, and you can remember things that happened in your past, and you hope you have a future, but really there's only the moment. You're only in the moment. And I think you have to make the most of that, and just stay in that moment. It's hard to do. It's hard to do when, you have to work, you have to plan, you have to think, you have to think about your day, you have to think about your week, you have to think about your year, you have to think about, when am I going to do this? When am I going to do that? I better save for this. I better save for that. Um, I need to achieve this goal. I have to go to school, or I have to, have a promotion, or I want to go here on a vacation. You have to plan for those things, but I think you have to try to live in the moment. And I think that's a really hard thing to do.
How in the moment are you during surgery?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. You have to be in the moment there. Yeah, yeah. You can't be. It's funny, you have to be in the moment, and yet you can be talking to people, telling jokes, or just asking, how was your weekend, or what'd you guys do, or oh yeah, I went to that concert, or you can do that. Like that's one level of your mind can do that, and you need to do that to stay calm.
Mm.
You like I said earlier, people that come into an OR for the first time are like oftentimes shocked at what a relaxed atmosphere it is. Unless something bad's going on, then it's not particularly relaxed. But generally, it's a relaxed atmosphere. But at the same time, that at one plane, you're just interacting with people around you socially. But at another plane, you're very, very, in the moment, concentrated, and you're just, kind of, and each one moment leads to another moment, leads to another moment. So yeah, pretty much in the moment.
Do you have any practices that help you be in the moment? Do you focus on anything, any kind of mental exercises, or because for me, it's really cool that you have this spectrum where you understand what in the moment is like and what not being in the moment is like. And I can relate to that with sparring or martial arts
Mm-hmm.
because you have to very much be in that moment when there's that competition in front of you because you can get seriously injured.
Mm-hmm.
So like these motion patterns, whether it's snowboarding or skateboarding or martial arts or something where you're actually using your motor skills, I feel like it's much easier to stay present because that deeper part of your brain can kind of take over something that is been through, countless times. And maybe it just kind of just popped in. Maybe that's why people have a hard time being present in meditation because they're not doing anything with their body. So they're trying to actually get their mind to focus deeper into the present moment, which is rather difficult when we have, I think we make like 35,000 choices a day or something.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're constantly thinking and constantly doing things to hone that back in is pretty different.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any practices that helped you kind of stay focused?
Nothing formal. I guess, and you're speaking about surgery.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I did pretty routinely is, uh, right before surgery, there's a lot going on. Um, the patient's coming in the room. The nurses are getting the patient ready. The anesthetist and the anesthesiologist are putting the person to sleep and securing their airway. And while all that's going on, and I like to put the person on the table, that helps me focus in the correct position. But while all that other stuff is going on, I always would gather the images that I had, the MRIs, the X-rays, the CAT scans, whatever they were, and I would try and put it all together in my mind, kind of the sequence of what I had to do. I mean, obviously that's part of surgical planning, but and you do that at several stages, but right at that time, I would kind of tune everything in the room out and just look at the images, because everybody was doing something else at that point. They weren't asking me, hey, Dr. Floyd this, Dr. Floyd that. Everybody was, so it was like my moment where I could sit there and pull the images together, create in my mind a sort of a three-dimensional idea of what was wrong with the person, what we call the pathology, where it was, how I was going to get there, what challenges I may have getting there, how I was going to, meet those challenges. In other words, if this vessel started to bleed, how I was going to take care of it, whatever, those kinds of things. So that was a big part of it. And then, while you're operating, sometimes, for lack of a better word, negative thoughts come into your head. You're like, oh my God, if I cut through this, I'm going to rip into the aorta and then the person's going to bleed to death. You just, you put that away. It's there, that potential is there. You just know how you're going to deal with it if it does happen, in terms of stopping the bleeding or whatever. But you don't allow yourself to get distracted by those kinds of things. You just get the job done. And if, something happens, then that takes you down a different little road and you got to deal with it. But so I think those are probably, in terms of surgery, those are probably the two things that I would do to help keep myself focused.
That's incredible. It's amazing how much worry lives in the past or the future.
Mm-hmm.
And you just had a beautiful example on how you stay present, because it really is, you have to go off of what's happening right there, or you're literally not in the moment at all.
Right.
And it's so cool to hear from like your point of view, your experience level. That's a completely different aspect of focus on something.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, I mean, a lot of people, I talk with my dad about this a lot, they may be able to understand what surgery they just went through, but they don't know like what their body looks like inside. They don't know the process. There's a lot of missing components. So to kind of get an understanding from you on how that process and that pathology kind of works, it's pretty incredible. Do you take notes when you think about like the variables that could go wrong, or that, if you had to adapt, or is that kind of all held in your head?
Early on, you do that. Early on, you either make physical or mental notes. Early on, your mind is more capable of making mental notes. Later on, it's not. But
I've noticed that.
yeah. But again, I think that's just part of why it takes so long to train and all that sort of thing, because you just it's just automatically there. Once you've seen something, for example, that can go wrong, and you're able to deal with it because of your training. You go, wow, I've never seen this happen before, but I've read about it. People have talked about it. And then, okay, so but then you tuck it away and it's just an experience. So if it ever comes up again, first of all, you're more relaxed about it the second time. And then, you just know how to take care of it. So it becomes just another task in a way, of how to take care of something.
I can see that. for me, so I've been training people for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and there came a point where I actually wouldn't write our class routine
Mm-hmm.
until I saw who showed up, until
Yeah.
I kind of, felt where their bodies were for that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just able to literally make it on the spot because of, years and years of just doing that with different body types and different goals and all of these components
Mm-hmm.
that just kind of become second nature when because you can understand like what's going to apply in this small group, and you can be like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that because they're not ready for that, so you just kind of swoop that out of the way, and then you have this combination of potential outcomes and potential responses. And so I think, like, I mean, for in my opinion, that probably shows level of expertise that a person can acquire after taking all of those handwritten notes and all of those different aspects and being in different scenarios when someone's trying to lose weight but they can't lift overhead, or I can't even imagine the spectrum of variables that you've dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
That's just got to be unreal.
Well, I think it's why people subspecialize,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the people that are able to be what we call generalists, whether it's in surgery or, um, medicine, I have a lot of respect for them. I mean, how in the world are you able to know all the pediatric disorders and how to treat them, and the, adult, and the allergy and the immunology and the, GYN, and I mean, it goes on and on and on. How in the world can you have command of that knowledge? That's a really admirable thing to be able to do.
A buddy of mine, he has a master's, can't remember in exactly what, but he talked about like that's the importance of specializing in something, and how like a doctor is like in a theory they should be like the only person on the planet that knows that thing extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I've thought about actually going back and getting my master's degree for communication, because I wrote my final paper on mindfulness and meditation.
Hmm.
And so I think it'd be really, really beautiful to kind of go back and understand like or find some way of using all of this acquired knowledge over the past few years in float tanks and the plant medicine or just meditation, and how movement can induce a certain state of mind and kind of all of these different components. But I mean, it's something, just a tangent,
Yeah.
side note in a
Yeah.
sense.
Always growing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like you can grow still at your level of experience,
Oh,
just in
well,
general?
um, it's not going to be in medicine. Not that there's not room for growth for me in medicine. There is. I mean, the field, even my little tiny, narrow little field. I mean, I'm even subspecialized within spine surgery. I'm subspecialized in adult deformity surgery. I mean, I sort of, and that field is rapidly changing. And so there's room for growth there. But like I said, I'm 64, and I don't have a whole lot longer really to do this sort of work. I always felt that spine surgeons should not work beyond 60, that 65 would be the absolute limit. I've seen a couple of spine surgeons that did a really good and were really on top of their game at 65, but beyond that, I don't know. I don't think it's a good idea. So medicine won't be the area, but I've got other interests in my life. I've been working on a dressing that stops bleeding, and it has other properties to it. And so, that's going to be a huge area for me in the next few years, because we've done all of our experiments, and we're now going to be introducing it on a wide scale worldwide. We've already introduced it in a couple of countries, and it works really well. It's really gratifying to be able to make a contribution like that, because when you're practicing medicine and you're seeing one patient at a time, hopefully you're making a big difference in that person's life, and that's a really satisfying feeling to be able to help make a positive change in someone's life. But when you're able to be part of something like this dressing, and make a change for mankind, in a sense, then that's it's sort of a like just a whole different level of being able to help.
Did you help create this product?
No, the patent was developed at the Virginia Commonwealth University. It happened in the early part of this century when, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were at their height, and the Department of Defense said, we got to find something that can stop bleeding because so many people were having these devastating wounds, and hemorrhage was a huge problem. And there just wasn't a dressing available that soldiers or whatever could apply that would be life-saving.
Would you mind describing exactly what a dressing is?
A dressing is like a Band-Aid.
Okay.
This is just a really sophisticated Band-Aid. And the nice thing about it is it dissolves in your hands, not in your hand, but when you apply it to any wet surface, blood, the dressing dissolves and goes away. And when you take your hand away, there's a blood clot where so you take this white, piece of material and you put it on a bleeding area and you hold your hand there 2 minutes and you take your hand away and there's no dressing. It's just sealed over with a blood clot. And
that's incredible.
It's pretty revolutionary. Like I said, certainly wasn't my idea, but I got involved with it early on, and I've done basically the experiments that led up to, the approval and distribution of it.
What's it made out of? Like, how does it dissolve into the body?
It's made out of 3 things. It's made out of 2 clotting proteins and a solid form of sugar. And so, what happens? It's like cotton candy. It's like putting clotting proteins into cotton candy and then putting that cotton candy onto something that is bleeding. The cotton candy is going to dissolve, and when it dissolves, it leaves the proteins. The proteins then interact with each other and form a blood clot. And the first thing that happens when you put it on is that, say, the cotton candy stops the flow of blood. It's bleeding rapidly. You take this big wad of cotton candy, you put it on there, so you get this physical pressure. But then pretty quickly, once the bleeding is controlled, the cotton candy starts to dissolve, and then what's left behind are the proteins.
That literally sounds revolutionary.
It's definitely the next step. First of all, there was just direct pressure, and then there were tourniquets, and then dirt. We still have what the dressing that every soldier carries with them now is basically high-tech dirt. It's clay impregnated into a cotton gauze, and that's if you get injured, somebody's going to stuff dirt into your wound because it works. So this is a much higher level of sophistication, and it works a lot better than dirt.
Sounds like it. It's really cool to hear too. When someone gains enough experience, then they're able to comprehend all of the problems that have not been solved yet. So for you to kind of jump on board with something that you may have seen, a problem that should be handled differently, that's got to be pretty awesome for you as a person.
Yeah, and again, it was just one of those things. It was another boat that came along. I was comfortably on my dock, and this boat pulled up, and there was a company that was just forming, and they needed it was another serendipity plays into this as well, but they needed a surgeon who had combat experience, and I happened to know one of the people that was involved with the company. The boat pulled up. I said, I'll step on this boat for a while. And so again, when those things come, you need to, I think really, go for it. I think when something comes up, you need to, like my wife, when I met her, she was the most beautiful person I've ever known in my life. And I met her at night in the hospital at 11 o'clock. And I thought to myself, I really got to get on this boat. This is, I can't let this one sail off into the horizon there. I need to get to know her.
That's cool. That's beautiful. Do you ever think about if you didn't serve in the military, what that would do for your life right now? Because if they were looking for a surgeon with combat experience,
Yeah.
would you even be doing what you're doing?
Good point. There you go. There's how one thing can lead to another, and everything builds. And then as the network gets broader and broader, there's just more and more opportunities that happen. And yeah, that's a very good example of why it's important to take that step. Because if I hadn't, then this other thing never would have come along, and I wouldn't be part of that.
Dang, it's almost like that one choice opened up a completely different door for you in the
Right.
future even.
Yes.
It's almost like a time portal in a sense. Like you doing something right now is literally impacting your future self
Huh. Good point.
for better or worse.
Yeah. Good way to look at it.
And yeah, that's pretty fascinating.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. And how do these things come about?
Yeah, it's remarkable because I mean all of the components that built the company that you're working with,
Mhm.
and all of their thought patterns and experiences and trial and errors, and now they have a sustainable business that you can be a part of.
Mhm.
How anything works is beyond me. It's just truly beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's like the human body. We take it for granted, but it's so complicated. I mean, just making the human body, or any organism really. Two cells come together, and somehow that knows how to develop into, a body that can then live for a century. Kind of amazing.
And build bones. And okay, how do bones grow? How do teeth grow? Do you know? This is always fascinating me. Like, how do teeth form in the body? How do bones grow in the body?
Teeth, I'm not so sure about. It grows by a similar process, but bone grows by two mechanisms. It grows from inside the bone, and then there are these things called growth plates, and it's cartilage that grows in one direction, and it forms new cartilage in one direction. And as that cartilage gets further and further away from what we call the growth plate, where it starts, then it picks up calcium and becomes mineralized, and then that gets reformed into a very, very similar substance, bone. But that's how it starts. And then there's a skin around every bone that we call the periosteum, and that is able to make bone as well. So if you're an adult and you break a long bone, it's that skin that heals your bone. But a lot of the length of bones, all of the length of bones for the most part, is formed by that other growth plate mechanism, where it forms cartilage that just grows away from the plate and then becomes mineralized.
What are some of the most important minerals for people to eat in their diet to help with healthy bone growth or anything?
Yeah. That's again, the wisdom of nature and of the body and everything. And, nutrition, boy, that's a big, and there are a big field, and there are a lot of theories and philosophies, and there's some science and everything involved in it and everything. But basically, nature knows best. And if you have a good balanced diet, I don't really think you have to worry about it. But you have to have a good balanced diet. And what is that? What is a good balanced diet? There's theories and arguments about what a good balanced diet is. But but basically, we wouldn't be here, because for thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds or thousands or millions of years, we didn't have, scientists telling us what we should eat, or people like that. It just happened. And yeah, there are special circumstances where you can become malnourished. Like if you put a bunch of guys on a wooden boat in the 17th century and send them around the world, they're going to get scurvy because they're going to be lacking vitamin C. And then when somebody, figured out, oh, let's just give these guys a lime.
Whoa.
And
Is that what scurvy's from?
yeah,
Dang.
yeah. And so, if they eat citrus, I think that's where the term limey came from. I'm not sure, but I think that's where it came, because they would bring limes on boats and eat it. Then they wouldn't get scurvy. So again, that was a group of people in a abnormal situation on a boat where God knows what they were eating. Rats and flour probably. you know, um, and so naturally they're going to get a nutritional deficiency. But lacking, in the absence of a nutritional deficiency, I think that the body and nature takes care of itself, basically. So that was a long answer to your question. You asked me what sorts of minerals.
It's the perfect answer.
When people are healing from a fracture, whatever, they often ask that, or if they've had a fusion, a spinal fusion, and they want to grow new bone. Really, that's been my answer all along. It's just have a good general diet. If you're a strict vegetarian, you got to make sure you get some vitamin B12 somehow, because there really isn't a non-animal source for that. And so you can get a deficiency that way. But yeah, just a good diet. And if you eat too much calcium, it just goes right out, because your body maintains these minerals. These minerals are all involved in a lot of things, but one thing they're involved in is conduction in your heart.
Like the electrolytes?
Yes. And if that gets just a little bit out of whack, you're dead. And so your body's really good at maintaining those concentrations. And so if you I'm going to take an extra calcium, you're just going to pee it right out. And you might even get a kidney stone doing that. So you don't want to take too much. That's why people who, endurance athletes, for example, who drink a lot of water, there's water, they can actually dilute the sodium in their system and have a fatal arrhythmia based on that, because they're too dilute. And so, you can kind of go the other extreme. You think you're doing a good thing by hydration is good. And I'm trying to hydrate myself better, but too much hydration is a bad thing. So, just moderation.
In terms of like diluting the body, that makes a lot of sense with too much water intake. I haven't really processed it that way before. I am aware of how important the electrolytes are in the currents in the body and the way the heart beats and just the sustainability of our body function. So it's really, it helps me. It's nice to ask you these questions and kind of get your expertise on it, because it helps show me what I'm learning and what I feel like I know well is kind of more on point. It kind of, builds that confidence inside of me as well, to trust what I know and trust kind of what I do, even just with my own body, let alone helping other people, guide into their own health. And I always thought that too much calcium caused kidney stones.
It can.
But then I also heard that not enough calcium can cause kidney stones. Is that correct?
I don't know how that would happen unless your body needed calcium, and so it started to get it out of the bone. So when your body needs calcium, that's where it goes. It goes to the bone. It doesn't really rely on what you're taking in. You've got a huge body store of calcium in your bones. So I suppose you could mobilize too much calcium and form a kidney stone, but I'm not aware of another mechanism that would happen.
What are the bones made out of?
Protein, protein called collagen, which is a stringy protein, and it attaches to each other, so that forms a matrix, a honeycomb network sort of thing. And then calcium, and the calcium is interspersed between the collagen, the protein. So it's and bone is living. People don't think of bone as living, but bone is a living tissue. It's constant turnover. Yeah, it's just like your fingernails.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, you don't think about your fingernails being alive, and it's really not, but it's constantly growing. It's constantly shedding, and so your bones it takes about 2 years but you completely replace the bone you have right now is not the bone you had in your arm 3 years ago. It looks exactly the same, but every molecule in that bone, for the most part, has been replaced over a period of time. Maybe a little longer than 2 years in that case of that bone. But yeah, bone is completely remodeled. It's like your hair growing out. And so it has a blood supply, and there are networks of cells all through it. And these cells are capable of getting calcium. So your body calcium drops, you send signals out. These little cells in your body, no problem. Pluck a couple of molecules of calcium, stick it in the bloodstream, and if your whole skeleton does that, pretty soon, your calcium levels reconstituted. And there's hormones that control that, parathyroid hormone, those kinds of things. They control what those cells are doing and how they're maintaining the calcium, like store it, pull it out of storage, that kind of thing. It's all controlled hormonally.
Which is, how much does the pineal gland help with that?
Pineal's not involved too much in...
Or the pituitary?
Oh God, you're going to embarrass me now.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's so easy to slip knowledge in certain aspects.
Well, there's what's called basically steroids. Are controlled through the pituitary gland largely, and also the adrenal glands. And so, and that whole axis, we call it an axis because your pituitary and the glands above your pituitary are talking to, other organs, other what we call endocrine organs in your body, those that are involved in the production of hormones. And, that's how the signals are put out there. And there are feedback mechanisms that there's too much of this hormone, so it feeds back on the thing that turned it on, so it turns it off, and then everything kind of shuts down and goes into what we call homeostasis. So if things get out of whack, your pituitary activates, your thyroid hormone. If you get in stress, for example, you produce steroids, corticosteroids, and those actually have a detrimental effect. They start to break down your body to give you those nutrients and that strength to, fight off the saber-toothed tiger. But when your saber-toothed tiger is a boss that's just a jerk, and you're under stress every single day, then you're producing those hormones every single day, and that over time has detrimental effects. It was designed for a short-term survival mechanism, but because like I said, the saber-toothed tiger comes, you got to run, or you got to fight, or you got to throw at something, something, you got to get out of there. But when stress in our modern society becomes a daily, chronic, nagging, inescapable thing, then all these stress hormones start to have negative effects on your body and on your mind. And that can wear you down.
And that all roots into the endocrine system.
Right.
Is that right?
Right.
So you explained that so well. For anybody to understand, and for me to understand deeper, knowing what I know. And so the endocrine system, are you familiar with like the chakras in Eastern philosophy? To some extent?
Very superficial understanding. Yeah.
Cool. So from my understanding of that, Eastern medicine, is each chakra is aligned with a certain part of the endocrine system. So like if one of them is out of balance, it can actually root deep down into your body chemistry. So it is about like balancing our endocrine system as well as like our energy wheels is kind of what they call them. So that was their comprehension of like how our body communicates through itself. And if one is flared and way too, stressed or active, then how do we actually balance that somewhere else in the body, or how do we relieve that stress in that section of the body? Because, they didn't have scientific readings back then, but they could feel the body, and they could probably feel where energy was being stored and blocked and all of those different components. And maybe they could feel the inflammation because it radiates differently. If there's smoothness and pure communication in the body, that's going to feel vastly different than if someone's rid with disease and there's no fluid motion. So it's really cool to hear you talk about how, like, when one's overactivated, one will kind of balance that out in a different aspect. It's our body. It's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
How much do you know about the fascia?
In your body?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I know it from an anatomical and a surgical standpoint, and that is it's a membrane in a way that envelops all your muscle groups. And then there's fascia, excuse me, that divides what we call compartments in your body. Like in your neck, there are several compartments. And they're all sort of set off from each other by fascia that runs along it. So where your carotid artery and your internal jugular vein and your vagus nerve are, they're all enclosed in a fascial compartment. And so they're kind of sequestered. So if I'm doing surgery on somebody's neck, I can put my finger on that and just move it out of the way because the fascia is going to protect it. And so fascia helps you define, when surgeries, fascia helps you define planes that you can safely go through. I can separate this group of things from this group of things by going between the fascia of those. We call it the interfascial plane. So that's one way you can kind of bloodlessly, you think, oh, I'm going to cut the body open, it's going to be bleeding everywhere and everything. Well, if you do it right, you follow these fascial planes and you really don't have much bleeding.
It's so cool to hear that inner understanding of that. So how much do you know about like the fascial movement planes and how the body should actually be rotating or like hinging?
You know, I understand it only from a mechanical standpoint. I know that there are people who deal with the fascia from outside the body in a therapeutic way, but I don't really know anything about that. Yeah, I wish I did, but it's I mean, it's related to what I do, but on the other hand, what I need to do with the body, I need to do kind of regardless of that. Yeah.
Very good point. Huh, okay. I think last question on fascia. I love fascia. It's so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Do you know much about like the myofascial release?
That's what I mean. That's a really good example of no, I don't. Like I said, I know that there are people who do that, and I've benefited from that. You know, personally, myofascial release, but it's interesting. It's using the same tissue that I use. I know nothing about it though, really. It's just not in my therapeutic armamentarium, you know.
Can you see when you're working around the fascia, like if there's parts of it that are bunched up or more fluid and like laying down efficiently, or can you tell like they might be tight in one area?
Sure. The fascia can get tight and cause problems. Probably the most common one is people that get pain around the point of their hip, kind of on the side. That's when the fascia gets too tight, and then it causes the tendon there to rub over that bone, that bump. That there's a little bony bump there called a greater trochanter, and it can rub on that and cause inflammation. And so again, that's a place where this myofascial release works. You get people who get in there and work at it and work at it and work at it and get it to release and have the person stretch the fascia and everything, and eventually, naturally get it stretched out. I think that people get that from largely, overuse, but also sedentary people get it because they just sit and watch TV all the time and everything kind of gets tight and draws up and everything, and they get up and, walk somewhere and it starts to hurt. I can go in there with a knife and just nick it and loosen it up and then it's all over. So, I mean, it's just two different ways of looking at the same thing.
Huh. Interesting. So I've noticed this too. I've been managing the float center the past like 8 months, and I mean, I'm sitting down a lot more than I ever have before.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm definitely noticing some more like impingements or pain, like in like the lower part of my spine
Mm-hmm.
and like kind of like, like my coccyx kind of area. And it bothers me because like I know what to do, but like what I've been doing recently hasn't been like releasing that part. But it's amazing when like you're so right when we're sitting down and then when we stand, our hips are super tight. So now we get straight by flaring our rib cage, and that's how most people lift overhead is they flare their rib cage. They think they're going up, but they're jeopardizing their spinal column and their angles and all of these weird components that like our body morphs to because of literally our lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And then we try and break free from that, the best we can, but without the proper knowledge or education or ways to actually release the tissues in the body safely and accurately, like we're almost, I mean, maybe this is a more direct opinion, but damaging the body more than we're helping it.
Mm-hmm.
And that bothers me to a great extent because that was a decade of my fitness experience was not understanding those kinds of components
Mm-hmm.
and not really understanding how the nervous system works or how the fascia works in the body or how to actually like properly align the joints and mobilize the body with its proper ball and socket areas
Mm-hmm.
and everything like that. And it bothers me because I was well educated, yet I didn't understand the most like some really important parts about the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a big reason why we've actually built this platform is to share this better knowledge, this knowledge that I wish I had when I was beginning,
Sure.
because it would have saved me so much trouble, so much chaos. And I mean, like problems, I'm experiencing problems now down the line, even though my form was theoretically perfect,
Mm-hmm.
and I was activating all the right spots, but there were still these little components that just weren't set in place.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's really important for myself. Man, I'm a constant learner,
Yeah.
do my best to learn to every person, every moment, and to have my eyes open to exactly what you're talking about, the endocrine system, all of these components in a deeper way, not just reading in a textbook and understanding that it exists,
Right.
but comprehending the process that it goes through. It's helped me exponentially.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think that's awesome.
It was pretty awesome. um, I'm really curious to hear your understanding on the nervous system. How do you what do you know about that, or how would you describe it to somebody?
Well, I mean, it'd be hard to summarize. I mean, it's really complicated. There's so many components to the nervous system. There's the component of the nervous system that's within our consciousness. I'm going to move my arm. I'm going to pick this object up. I'm going to, that's all something we command. Our mind commands our nervous system to do. But then there's this whole other layer that we're not conscious of that's happening. I don't know where my small intestines are right now. I mean, I know they're in my belly, but I don't know what loop is where and what's doing what. I don't know how dilated the femoral artery in my right leg is right now. It's all controlled by a subconscious part of your nervous system that's just kind of, like the hormonal system, just doing its thing, just like maintaining that homeostasis I was talking about and, keeping us going. So, that's probably the majority of our nervous system. For humans, thinking is probably like if you're at work or whatever, it consumes something like at least 50% of your energy is consumed by your brain. So it's not like you're not burning calories, but and a lot of that activity is, again, subconscious activity. Breathing. You're not, unless you're thinking about it, you're not really aware of your breathing. You're not aware of your heart beating unless it does something funny and you go, "Whoa, what was that?"
Totally.
So yeah, so much of the nervous system is at a very subconscious or unconscious level.
Have you ever floated before?
No. I'm the generation I saw that movie with William Hurt in it.
Altered states.
Yes. and believe it or not, I'm a little bit claustrophobic. I can overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little bit afraid of my mind.
It's
And
very
so
common.
I think the combination of all that has kept me out of it. Your father has asked me to float like for years, and I keep dodging. I keep changing the subject whenever he brings it up.
For sure. Yeah, he talks about it with every single person, I think.
Yeah.
It's cool because first of all, we can make the tank comfortable for
hmm
an array of different scenarios. We c- we can leave the pod door open, we can leave the light on.
Leave the pod door open, Hal.
Yeah, we can play music through the whole time. So, like, under many different conditions, we can make it comfortable for a lot of different people. Just something to keep in mind. But something that I really find fascinating is there's a study that's been happening and still going on about floating rerouting the association people have with their trigger for their anxiety.
Hmm.
So you talked about when you feel your heartbeat and they go, oh, you notice it because it was irregular.
hmm
So two of the main triggers for an anxiety driven state are the heartbeat and the breath. So when people are feeling anxiety and they feel their heartbeat, it's almost too late because they're already in that state.
hmm
So what's happening in the float tank is you're quieting the senses of the mind and of the body so deeply that people are feeling their heartbeat and feeling their breath and reassociating them to calmness and relaxation instead of anxiety.
Interesting.
So it's deeply like morphing the body and mind to like understand that, oh, if I feel the heartbeat, doesn't mean I'm in anxiety anymore.
hmm
So then now they get that huge spectrum. It's pretty incredible.
I think I will try it one day. Right now, I'm on a little leave of absence to have some surgery done on my body, and so I have more time. But that's the other thing. I never felt like I had, and probably everybody feels that way, but I don't know when I would have had the time to do it. I could have made the time, I suppose, but um, I don't know. It's interesting to me, and
Hmm.
I would like to experience it.
It's mainly when the time is right, there's no
Yeah,
rush ever.
yeah.
It's cool too. We have a bunch of like psychologists that come in, and
Hmm.
so to hear their perspectives, I talked with one of them, Ciara, on our podcast. I can't remember what episode 27 or 28 or something, and her perspective is so cool. It's so fascinating to me to engage with these people from completely different backgrounds that understand the same thing in a completely different light. And yet we can come to like similar
Hmm.
lessons about something
Yeah.
and
Right.
similar,
Right.
like just an understanding that you might see it a little bit differently, but it holds similar value.
Uh huh.
And something that's really been popping up for me recently is how similar are we as people in terms of what lessons are we all actually trying to learn? Is one of them how to deal with being overwhelmed? Is one of them compassion? Is one of them forgiveness and insecurities? Like, what are these commonalities that we're actually all kind of learning?
hmm
And that's been brought to my attention a lot on this podcast where like we actually aren't as different as we may think we are.
hmm
Every person I've talked to, they're pretty much coming to a similar understanding of themselves and of people, and they have the same worries and the same fears or things that excite them or anything. It's blowing me away.
Yeah. And I think that people around the world are the same. I mean, I think that people in every country have exactly the same worries um, and desires and wishes. I mean, everybody has to wake up in the morning. Everybody has to get something to eat. Everybody has to get their kids off to school. Everybody has to make a living somehow. Everybody has to worry whether it's the bank is going to take your roof away from you or the next rain is going to take your roof away from you. Everybody's got that concern. Um, whether a tiger's going to come out of the jungle and get you or whether your boss is going to fire you that day. Everybody's got the same worries the world over, and we're all really the same. And I've uh, met a lot of people that you would think would be a lot different. Like, you know, in Iraq, we dealt a lot with terrorists. I mean, actual, terrorists, Fedayeen, Islamic terrorists, they were just the same as everybody else. They may have had some weird ideas, about how to achieve their goals or the importance of their goals or whatever, but they had goals, they had beliefs. And I'm not saying I agree with, what it was, but, just everybody's the same the world over.
It seems that world travel really helps people understand that.
Everybody should travel. And you have, and you'll probably agree with me, everybody should go to a third world. If you think that you've got it bad here at all, when people come on the news and they're upset about this or that or this or that, I met a man the other day who grew up in Mogadishu, Somalia. And for your listeners who are maybe familiar with the movie Black Hawk Down, he was a kid growing up in Mogadishu at that time. He was there then. When it was complete anarchy, when warlords ruled, and one would rise up and take over one warlord's area, and then another would rise up and take over. He said it was constant warfare. They were constantly having to leave where they lived. They didn't have any possessions, basically. All institutions were shut down. There were no schools or banks or hospitals or anything like that, maybe very rudimentary. And they had to just, at a moment's notice, when a warlord would come through and be fighting, they'd have to grab whatever they had and run down the alleyways for a mile or two until they got to their cousin's house that was in a sort of a safe area, and then they'd live there for a while. And so that was his growing up. Somehow his parents said, read. So whenever they could get a book, they would teach their kids to read and have them read. They read everything they could. He wound up going to medical school in Jordan. And he's here now. He's a doctor here. He's trying to get his license here in the United States. Very bright man. And I asked him, I said, what do you feel like when you listen to the news and you find out that people are upset about the things that they're upset about in this country? And he just said, I just really don't know how bad things can be. So I think we're not that people's concerns are trivial. I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to say that, any particular thing that's going on isn't important to people, but it's all in perspective. What we think are really horrible here in this country, other people around the world, it would be a luxury for them. They're literally don't know where they're going to sleep that night or what they're going to eat tomorrow or that kind of thing. And so yeah, I'm with you. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but I'm with you. I think that travel is important for people. I wish every American could go to a third world country for, a while, at least 2 or 3 weeks, and actually not live in a 5-star hotel and, take a tour bus out into the ghettos or something, but actually get out there in it and see what the rest of the world's like.
I agree completely. I was extremely fortunate to be with a local in Cambodia, which is one of the, the poorest countries on the planet.
See?
And that changed me for the rest of my life, without a doubt. And seeing he took me on his moped all around Cambodia, going to every local location and places where people live that nobody knows about.
Yeah, just in a shack, if that.
Yeah, exactly. Literally tin shacks. And it's, with even pondering this and recalling this, it's stirring up those same emotions. And one of the biggest difficulties that I faced coming back in the first few months was hearing everybody complain about something on Facebook,
right,
or some just trivial consequence of someone's action.
Right.
And it was really hard for me to come back to that. But eventually I kind of just realized, they haven't had the opportunity to experience what I've been through. They
Right.
they don't have a comprehension. And it really hit me because until I had an actual spectrum of understanding what I thought poverty was and then experiencing it, there was no way for me to understand what that'd be like.
No way.
There's no way. There's nothing for me to like relate it to.
Right.
I mean, there's a smell to it, there's a feel to it, there's a sensation on your skin from the environment. There's things that you see that literally shift everything you perceive. And until you're in that environment where you're absorbing it through all of your senses, there's no way to fully comprehend what that would be like. And it's kind of one of the pieces of wisdom or insight that have been pulled from that.
And you experienced it viscerally. I mean, like I said, you weren't in a tour bus going around, or you were there on the back of this moped going places. Yeah.
It changed me for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. That's a good thing.
It is. I'm beyond grateful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, so just to share something, I don't know if I've talked about it even on this podcast. My buddy, he would go harvest lotus flowers. And for people who don't know, I didn't know, lotus flowers grow in sewage water. So he had to swim out in sewage water, get the lotus flowers, bring them back, wash them off, and then, give them to the local restaurants and whichever. And he would get, sores on his body, all of these different effects from being in that water. And oftentimes that water was literally underneath like a village. So they would have a hole in their home where they would use the restroom. It dropped right underneath them, and they were living next to this, this sewage patch in a sense.
Wow.
It's just like those moments, man, they changed me forever.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's pretty profound.
It is. Coming from, the Western world in Boise, Idaho, like even here, there's, people who are in poverty, but there's not like real poverty here.
Right.
And whether this is just an opinion or something, it feels like in the Western world, it's more of like a self-induced poverty, as to where over there it's just like pure poverty. There's just no way around it. And also, I don't know, the ghetto, all of that kind of stuff is a completely different component. But in terms of what we have access to here is just vastly different.
Yeah. Even like, our highly, what do you call it, the Internet of Things, we depend so much on the internet and all that sort of thing. And that's a reality for a lot of people. I mean, that's, and all it would take would be like a, huge computer shutdown.
I thought about this.
And people would be without their Instagram, and they're like, oh my God, it's anarchy. It's the end of the world. I mean, we're very far removed from reality, I think, or we've placed ourselves that way. Air conditioning, comfortable bed, stop at Starbucks for food in the morning, all those things. It's, even, no farming. We don't do our farming. I mean, we're pretty far removed from the day-to-day reality that most of the world lives in.
Yeah, most of the world, indeed. I've noticed a lot with business. So for us and for me, like our brand, it's worldwide. It's known across, multiple different countries. And that's only accessible because of the internet. So a lot of my attention has been on, building that platform online. And I realized even that within the past year that I've spent so much time in that world and not enough like in this world developing something that's like, a side component to it. Because so like if that went away, it'd be like, dang, what do we have left?
Yeah, it's like these futuristic movies where everything's virtual, and then all of a sudden, it shuts down.
Yeah. It can happen like that.
Yeah.
It's incredible, in the best and worst of ways. And it's funny too, if you even think about like building an email list for a business, that's like most businesses like heartbeat. That's where they market directly to the people who would like their products and support them. And but if your whole business is on Instagram and that platform goes away, how do these people find you?
Mm-hmm.
What happens with that?
Mm-hmm.
It's very fascinating for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so about like what we've been doing at the river,
Right.
and you just mentioned how we're very comfortable and we can go to Starbucks and get breakfast and many other components to that. How do you feel about us like shocking our
I think
bodies
it's awesome.
in that
I
way?
think it's awesome. I mean, that I haven't done it here with you guys. But yeah, no, I think it's anything where you can have a real genuine experience, even if it has to, shock you a little bit, like you said, getting in the cold water and getting out of the cold water.
Yeah.
How was it this weekend when it was all windy and everything?
We didn't do it this
Oh,
weekend.
okay.
So our last one was 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
But we were out filming in that and it was absolutely freezing.
Yeah.
It was freezing.
Yeah. Can you believe that people used to live here in like skin tents and and we're like I can't wait to I preheat my car before I get
Completely. I've been thinking about this the past like 6 months actually. How like they had to have been so well accustomed
Yeah.
and so well adapted to that lifestyle and walking, however far you'd walk to get to the next camp or setup. It's mind blowing what they were able and willing to do
Yeah.
because they had no other options.
Right. Yeah.
It's crazy because we can look back from where we currently are and see what they did, but they had no comprehension of what the future would hold.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's literally just what they did
Yeah. Living
every
in the
day.
moment. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that's something to really recognize in our evolution as a species. And for me, like be grateful for. But it's funny too because I also find myself trying to get back to that in some degree in a safe aspect, whether
Hmm.
it's cold therapy or travel or anything,
Hmm.
camping, anything.
Hmm.
I mean that's our roots.
Hmm.
That's where we literally come from as people.
Yeah.
Dr. Floyd, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This has been an hour and a half, and this was absolutely wonderful. You are welcome to share anything that you're feeling or would like to bring up, or these next few minutes are kind of yours if you have anything left to say.
Thank you, Zarin. I, I don't have anything other outside of what we talked about. I like the path you're on. I think, I've known you from afar because, talking to your dad and knowing him all these years, I think I've known your dad, gosh, almost as long as you've been alive. And I know he's very proud of you. And I know your mom's very proud of you. And I just think the path that you're on is really cool. I think what you're doing is great.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this before you arrived here, but people with your background and your life, even whether it's a psychologist or a surgeon or anybody else, a musician, it's really beautiful for me to be able to relate to people in all different backgrounds
Mm-hmm.
and actually like share a mutual understanding or respect for one another or even just appreciation. And for you, from I respect you on a different level, and everything you've been through, I've only been able to grasp the surface of your experience in life. And to be able to hold your respect to even any degree with this platform. I know you've been listening to the episodes and you've provided incredible feedback. It really is rejuvenating and refreshing and grounding to hear like people like yourself support what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That really helps show me that maybe we are doing something that's bringing value and this is a path that we should be walking, even if there's moments that in anything you do, you don't know if you should do it. It kind of falls off the
Yeah.
wagon, but you can get back on it. It's
Right.
just that beautiful, like, symbiotic relationship with what you do and even yourself, and how they can mold and blend. And so your words, they mean a lot. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And yeah, I look forward to learning more from you.
Same here.
Thank you,
Same
Dr.
here.
Floyd.
Bye bye. Thanks for having me.
Of course.